You're waiting for inspiration like a beggar waits for spare change. That's your first mistake. Inspiration is emotional. It's weak. It shows up late, leaves early, and abandons you the moment things get uncomfortable. Repetition doesn't care how you feel. Repetition doesn't negotiate. Repetition shows up every day and rewires who you are, whether you like it or not. Let me shock you with the truth most men can't handle. The world isn't run by talented people. It's run by obsessed people who repeat the same actions long after motivation dies. You think champions wake up inspired? No, they wake up programmed. And while you're chasing a feeling, they're building an identity. That's why they win, and you watch. You've been lied to. You were told to find your passion and wait for the spark. That advice was designed to keep you average. Repetition is the real power. Repetition is how weak men become disciplined, and disciplined men become dangerous. You don't rise to inspiration. You sink to the level of what you repeat. Now listen carefully. When I say speaking in tongues, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a private language of action, a code, a set of behaviors repeated so often they bypass thought and go straight to instinct. When you repeat something daily, it stops being something you do and becomes something you are. That's the transformation. That's the tongue of power. Your body starts obeying without debate. Your mind falls in line. Repetition is dominance over yourself. It's telling your emotions they no longer have a vote. Every repeated action is a command to your nervous system saying, this is normal now. Train hard every day? Normal. Work when tired? Normal. Winning while others complain? Normal. That's how identity shifts. Not with speeches, not with hype, with brutal, boring, relentless repetition. High-status men don't need inspiration because they don't ask permission from their mood. They've repeated discipline so long it speaks for them. Walk into a room and people feel it. Not because you talk loud, but because your presence is backed by years of enforced habits. That's why repetition beats inspiration every single time. One builds fantasies, the other builds monsters. Inspiration is emotional noise dressed up as wisdom. It feels powerful because it hits the brain like sugar, fast and loud, but it has no nutritional value. It gives you a temporary rush, not a permanent structure. Men cling to it because it flatters their ego. It lets them believe they're capable without forcing them to prove it. The moment discomfort appears, inspiration vanishes, and suddenly they're confused, stuck, and making excuses. That confusion isn't bad luck. It's the cost of relying on something fragile. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Anything that depends on emotion is unstable. Emotions change with sleep, food, stress, rejection, weather, and opinion. If your progress is tied to how you feel, then your life is being run by variables you don't control. That's not freedom. That's weakness disguised as self-expression. You don't rise when you feel good, you collapse when you feel bad, and bad feelings are guaranteed. Pressure is guaranteed. Resistance is guaranteed. So building a system that only works when you're in the mood is self-sabotage at a structural level. People love inspiration because it removes responsibility. When they fail, they don't blame themselves. They blame the absence of a feeling. I wasn't motivated. That sentence alone reveals everything. It means you've handed authority over your life to a temporary emotional state. Imagine a soldier saying he didn't show up because he wasn't inspired. Imagine a leader saying he didn't act because the mood wasn't right. You'd laugh. Yet men say this about their own lives and expect respect. Inspiration creates spectators, not operators. It trains you to wait, to scroll, to watch others win, to consume words instead of producing results. It turns discipline into something optional instead of mandatory. That's why motivational content feels good but changes nothing. It excites the mind without engaging the nervous system. No repetition, no conditioning, no rewiring, just dopamine and delay. The men who win don't need to feel ready. They've trained themselves to move without permission. They understand something most people never grasp. Action precedes emotion, not the other way around. You don't act because you feel strong. You feel strong because you act consistently under resistance. Inspiration reverses the order and weakens the outcome. When you rely on inspiration, you become predictable. You work in bursts. You quit in silence. You restart with speeches and stop with excuses. This cycle feels productive, but it's just motion without direction. Repetition, on the other hand, doesn't care about enthusiasm. It cares about execution. It builds momentum through consistency, not hype. And momentum is what creates confidence that doesn't shake under pressure. There's also a darker truth most men avoid. Inspiration makes you addicted to novelty, new ideas, new plans, new ideas. You're constantly reinventing instead of reinforcing. That keeps you fragmented. Powerful men are not fragmented. They are narrow, focused, and repetitive. They do fewer things better because they repeat them relentlessly. That's why they look calm. That's why they move with certainty. Their nervous system has been trained, not entertained. If you strip inspiration out of your decision-making, something interesting happens. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop negotiating. You stop asking whether today is the right day. The action becomes automatic, boring, effective. That boredom is where power lives. Weak men chase excitement. Strong men build systems that run even when they're tired, angry, or bored. So be honest with yourself. If you've been waiting to feel inspired, you've been waiting to stay average. Inspiration didn't fail you. You failed by trusting it. The moment you detach progress from emotion, you take back control. And control is the foundation of everything that follows. Repetition is the most honest mirror you'll ever face. It doesn't care about your intentions, your plans, or the version of yourself you describe to other people. It only reflects what you do again and again. That's why it's uncomfortable. Most men like to believe they're disciplined, ambitious, and dangerous, but their daily repetitions expose something softer. Identity isn't declared, it's installed. And repetition is the installation process. What you repeat daily becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar becomes normal. This is how identity is formed at the nervous system level, not in your thoughts. You don't wake up one day and decide to be disciplined. You repeat disciplined actions until your body no longer questions them. At that point, discipline isn't an effort, it's a default setting. The same way weakness becomes automatic when comfort is repeated long enough. This is where most people get it wrong. They think identity is about belief. It's not. Belief without repetition is fantasy. You can believe you're a hard worker, a leader, a winner. But if your daily behavior doesn't match, the belief collapses under pressure. Repetition is what gives belief weight. It's the difference between a story you tell and a reality others can feel. Your brain doesn't respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you consistently do. Repeated action sends a clear signal. This matters. Prioritize this. Optimize for this. Over time, your brain reallocates energy, focus, and resilience around those actions. That's how habits turn into traits. That's how effort turns into instinct. And once something becomes instinct, it stops costing you willpower. Identity shift isn't dramatic. It's quiet. No announcement, no applause. One day you notice you don't hesitate anymore. You don't argue with yourself. You don't need external pressure. The action happens before the thought finishes. That's when repetition has done its job. You didn't become someone new. You eliminated the old version through consistent replacement. This process is brutal because it exposes inconsistency. If your repetitions are chaotic, your identity will be unstable. If you work hard one week and disappear the next, your nervous system never locks onto a pattern. You remain fragmented, confused, always restarting. Repetition is what creates coherence. A man who repeats the same standards daily moves differently, speaks differently, decides faster. That coherence is read as confidence by the outside world. There's also a hierarchy to repetition. High-status men repeat fewer things at a higher standard. Low-status men repeat distractions, avoidance, and comfort. Scroll long enough and your identity becomes passive. Skip difficult work enough times and your identity becomes fragile. These outcomes aren't moral failures, they're mechanical results. The machine does what it's fed. The dangerous part is that repetition compounds silently. You don't feel the change day to day, but months later, the gap is undeniable. One man has repeated discipline until it became effortless. Another has repeated delay until it became character. Both followed the same process. Only the inputs were different. This is why motivation speeches fade, but habits don't. Words excite the conscious mind. Repetition reshapes the subconscious, and the subconscious runs the show. When pressure hits, you don't rise to what you believe. You fall to what you've repeated. If you want to know who you really are, don't listen to your thoughts. Audit your repetitions. They are writing your identity whether you approve or not. Change them, and the man changes automatically. Ignore them and you stay exactly where you are, just with better excuses. Discipline is not about being productive. That's the lies sold to make it sound harmless. Discipline is about control, and control is threatening because it exposes who is actually in charge. Most men like to think they're free, but the moment discomfort shows up, they fold. Hunger, boredom, fatigue, temptation, these small pressures dictate their behavior. That's not freedom. That's obedience to impulse. Discipline is the act of removing impulse from the command chain. Every time you choose to do what needs to be done instead of what feels good, you're issuing an order to yourself. And every time you ignore that order, you teach yourself that your word means nothing. This is where self-respect is built or destroyed. Not in public moments, not in big wins. In private decisions where no one is watching and nothing is forcing you. Discipline is you proving to yourself that you can be trusted with authority. Most men misunderstand willpower. They think it's about forcing yourself to pain. That's amateur thinking. Real discipline is quieter. It's systematic. It's the ability to execute without emotional debate. When your mind says, "Not today," and your body moves anyway, something important happens. The hierarchy inside you shifts. Emotion steps down. Command steps up. Over time, that internal structure becomes stable. You don't feel like doing less. You simply do more by default. Self-domination is uncomfortable because it removes your favorite excuses. You can no longer blame mood, stress, or circumstances. You're exposed. Either you did the work or you didn't. Either you showed up or you hid. That level of accountability terrifies people because it leaves no room for self-deception. Discipline is ruthless honesty applied daily. There's a reason disciplined men appear calm under pressure. It's not confidence in outcomes. It's confidence in response. They know that no matter what happens, they will act correctly. That certainty is rare. Most people panic because they've never trained themselves to obey their own standards. When chaos hits, they negotiate. Disciplined men execute. The real power of discipline is that it compounds invisibly. At first, it feels heavy. Every action requires effort, resistance is loud. But repetition changes the cost. What once required force becomes automatic. The nervous system adapts. The resistance quiets. Eventually, not doing the action feels wrong. That's when control has been established. You're no longer fighting yourself. You've trained yourself. This is why discipline creates dominance beyond work. It changes posture, speech, decision-making. When a man knows he doesn't lie to himself, he doesn't seek validation, he doesn't over-explain, he doesn't rush. His presence carries weight because it's backed by internal order. Chaos inside always leaks outside. Order inside creates authority without effort. A lack of discipline doesn't just limit results, it erodes identity. Each skipped commitment weakens self-trust. Each delay reinforces fragility. Over time, the man becomes cautious, hesitant, reactive, not because life broke him, but because he trained himself to avoid discomfort. Discipline reverses that training. It rebuilds the nervous system to tolerate pressure and act anyway. The brutal truth is that discipline is available to everyone, but chosen by very few. Not because it's complex, but because it demands surrender of comfort. It requires you to stop being the victim of your emotions and become their superior. Once that shift happens, everything else accelerates. Work becomes cleaner. Decisions become faster. Standards rise naturally. Self-domination is not about intensity. It's about consistency under resistance. When you master that, motivation becomes irrelevant, confidence becomes stable, and power becomes internal. And internal power is the only kind that doesn't disappear when circumstances change. Automatic power is what separates men who hesitate from men who hesitate. From Adhikauri. It's the difference between thinking about action and being incapable of avoiding it. Most people live inside their head, trapped in endless analysis, convincing themselves they're strategic when they're actually scared. Automatic power removes that weakness entirely. When action is instinctive, fear doesn't get a seat at the table. Hesitation is not intelligence, it's a lack of conditioning. When you have to think yourself into action, you're already behind. The world doesn't reward the man who understands what to do. It rewards the man who does it immediately and repeatedly. Automatic power is built when behavior is rehearsed so many times that decision-making disappears. You don't pause. You don't debate. You move. This is how elite performers operate under pressure. Not because they're braver, but because their nervous system has been trained to respond without conscious permission. Conscious thought is slow. Instinct is fast. In high-stakes moments, speed wins. The man who needs to feel confident before acting will always lose to the man who acts first and lets confidence follow. Automatic execution is not reckless, it's precise. It's the result of repetition done correctly under resistance. When something is repeated enough, the brain stops treating it as a threat. The stress response lowers, cortisol drops, clarity increases. That's why trained men look calm in chaos. Their body recognizes the situation. There's no panic because there's no novelty. Most men sabotage themselves by living in constant novelty. New plans, new routines, new goals every week. That keeps them mentally entertained but physically untrained. Automatic power requires boredom. The same movements, the same standards, the same expectations enforced daily. Boring to the undisciplined. Deadly to the competition. When execution becomes automatic, excuses disappear. There's no space for later or tomorrow. The action triggers on schedule, not emotion. This is where reliability is born. And reliability is rare. People trust men whose behavior is predictable under pressure. Not predictable in weakness, but predictable in standards. That trust turns into authority. Automatic power also kills procrastination at the root. Procrastination isn't laziness. It's avoidance caused by internal friction. When action is automatic, friction doesn't exist. You don't need to overcome resistance because resistance has been trained out. The body moves before the mind starts complaining. This changes how you experience effort. Work no longer feels like a decision, it feels like alignment. The same way you don't debate brushing your teeth or locking a door, you just do it. That's the level discipline must reach to be useful. Anything less is temporary. Under pressure, people reveal their true training. When stress spikes, the conscious mind collapses. What remains is habit. If your habits are weak, you fold. If your habits are sharp, you perform. Automatic power is insurance against chaos. It guarantees performance even when conditions are hostile. There's a psychological dominance that comes with this. When you know you will act regardless of fear, doubt loses leverage. Anxiety still shows up, but it doesn't control behavior. That alone puts you ahead of most people who are ruled by internal noise. Silence inside is a competitive advantage. The final shift happens when action becomes identity. You don't see yourself as someone trying to be disciplined. You see yourself as someone who executes. That self-image reinforces behavior automatically. The loop closes. Action feeds identity. Identity fuels action. At that point, you're no longer chasing results. Results chase you, not because of luck, but because consistency at speed is unstoppable. Automatic power turns effort into inevitability. And inevitability is what dominance looks like in the real world. Comfort is the most socially accepted form of self-destruction. Nobody warns you about it because it doesn't look dangerous on the surface. It looks reasonable. It looks deserved. It looks like balance. And that's exactly why it ruins people quietly. Comfort doesn't attack you. It invites you. One small concession at a time, it trains you to avoid pressure and call it intelligence. Every time you choose ease over effort, you're not just resting. You're rehearsing weakness. The body learns quickly. Avoid discomfort today, and tomorrow it demands the same treatment. Skip the hard task once, and your nervous system marks it as optional. Do it repeatedly, and avoidance becomes your default setting. This is not philosophy. This is conditioning. The system adapts to whatever you repeatedly feed it. The dangerous part is that comfort feels productive at first. You optimize convenience. You remove friction. You tell yourself we're being efficient. But what you're really doing is shrinking your tolerance for resistance. Over time, even minor challenges start to feel overwhelming, not because they're harder, but because you're softer. Comfort doesn't make life easier. It makes you weaker relative to life. Men trapped in comfort often mistake calm for control. They avoid conflict. They avoid effort. They avoid intensity. Then they wonder why they feel restless, anxious, and dissatisfied. The nervous system needs stress to stay sharp. Remove stress entirely, and it turns against you. That's why comfort creates mental fog, low energy, and indecision. The system is understimulated and overprotected. Hard repetitions do the opposite. They expand capacity. When you repeatedly expose yourself to controlled difficulty, the body adapts upward. Pain tolerance increases. Focus sharpens. Confidence stabilizes. What once felt extreme becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes routine. This isn't about suffering for its own sake. It's about upgrading your operating range. Comfort also lies about safety. It convinces you that avoiding discomfort protects you from failure. In reality, it guarantees stagnation. The man who avoids discomfort avoids growth. And growth is the only real security. Skills, resilience, and self-trust are built under strain. Comfort builds none of these. It builds dependency on favorable conditions. Look closely at people who live in comfort long enough. They become reactive. Small problems feel personal. Pressure feels unfair. Accountability feels aggressive. They need reassurance constantly because their internal structure is weak. Hard repetition builds the opposite profile: calm under stress, emotional containment, decisive action, not because life is easier, but because the man is stronger. There's also a social cost to comfort that most people ignore. Comfortable men become predictable. They take fewer risks. They avoid confrontation. They choose the path of least resistance. That makes them easy to ignore and easy to replace. Hard men are rare because hard repetitions are avoided. Rarity creates value. Value creates leverage. Comfort trains you to negotiate with yourself. Just this once. Just today. Just until things improve. That internal negotiation never ends. Hard repetition ends the conversation entirely. The action is non-negotiable. Standards don't bend based on mood. That rigidity is not cruelty. It's clarity. The most dangerous myth is that comfort is something you earn and that enjoy without consequence. That's false. Comfort must be rationed, not celebrated. Used deliberately, not indulged daily. Otherwise, it erodes your edge silently. By the time you notice, the gap between who you are and who you could be feels impossible to close. Hard repetitions don't feel good in the moment, they feel correct, and correctness compounds. Over time, the man who chose discomfort consistently moves through the world with quiet confidence. He doesn't need motivation. He doesn't fear pressure. He doesn't crumble when things get difficult. While others search for relief, he operates from strength. You don't need more rest. You need more resistance. Comfort will give you temporary relief and permanent weakness. Hard repetition gives you temporary strain and permanent power. The outcome is decided by what you repeat, not what you intend. Rulers don't wake up asking how they feel. That question alone disqualifies most people from ever being dangerous. When your actions are negotiated by emotion, you're not in control. You're being managed by your own internal weather. Real power begins when behavior is no longer a response to mood, but a result of programming. That's the line between men who talk about success and men who normalize winning. Motivation is unreliable because it depends on novelty and excitement. Once those fade, the average man stalls. Rulers never enter that cycle because they don't require stimulation to function. They repeat the same standards until those standards become invisible. The work doesn't feel heroic. It feels expected. That expectation is what separates dominance from ambition. Ambition dreams. Standards execute. When winning becomes normal, losing feels foreign, not emotionally painful, but structurally wrong. The body rejects it, the mind corrects it. That reaction isn't built through speeches or visualization. It's built through enforced repetition. Show up when it's inconvenient. Execute when it's boring. Maintain precision when nobody's watching. Over time, the nervous system adapts to a higher baseline. Excellence stops feeling exceptional. This is why rulers appear calm while others panic. They are not calmer by nature. They are conditioned. Their response to pressure has been trained through repetition, not willpower. When stress hits, there is no internal discussion. The action is already decided. That decisiveness is read as authority by everyone around them. People follow certainty, not enthusiasm. Most men never experience this because they keep resetting their standards. One bad day and the rules change. One setback and discipline becomes optional. That flexibility feels compassionate, but it's corrosive. Rulers are inflexible with standards and flexible with tactics. The outcome matters. The process adapts. The commitment never wavers. Programming yourself to repetition removes ego from the equation. You don't need to feel confident to act. You don't need praise to continue. The system runs whether you're praised or criticized. That independence is rare. Most people are emotionally outsourced, powered by approval and validation. Rulers are internally powered. That's why they're hard to manipulate. There's also a compounding effect people underestimate. When winning becomes routine, decision-making accelerates. You don't second-guess. You don't overanalyze. You don't wait for reassurance. Speed increases without recklessness. Precision improves without tension. This creates momentum that others can't match because they're still negotiating with themselves. Spectators confuse this with arrogance. It's not. It's efficiency. When you've repeated correct behavior long enough, doubt becomes inefficient. You've seen the pattern too many times. You know what works because you've lived it daily. That lived certainty is unshakable. Opinions bounce off it. Noise doesn't penetrate it. The real advantage shows up over time. While others burn energy trying to restart motivation, rulers stay consistent. While others fluctuate, rulers compound. While others chase intensity, rulers rely on structure. Structure always wins because it doesn't depend on mood, circumstances, or external reinforcement. This level of control changes how you carry yourself. You don't rush. You don't overreact. You don't need to announce anything. Results speak quietly but clearly. People sense alignment. They sense internal order. That presence alone creates leverage, not because you demand it, but because it's earned through consistency. If winning still feels like an event instead of a baseline, the system isn't installed yet. If discipline feels heroic instead of automatic, repetition hasn't done its job. Rulers don't rise to the occasion. They reduce everything to routine until pressure has nothing new to attack. You don't become powerful by wanting it badly. You become powerful by repeating correct behavior until power feels ordinary. At that point, motivation becomes irrelevant, confidence becomes stable, and control becomes permanent. That's not inspiration. That's programming. Here's the reality check. If your life is weak, it's because your repetitions are weak. You repeat comfort, you repeat excuses, you repeat distraction. Then you act surprised by the results. Change the repetitions and you change the man. There is no other formula. So understand this and don't forget it. Inspiration is for spectators. Repetition is for rulers. Decide who you are. Program it through repetition. And once the code is written, there's no stopping what you become.